Prise de Fer. Prise de Fer is a movement used in fencing in which a fencer takes the opponent's blade into a line and holds it there in preparation to attack. Translated from French, the phrase prise de fer means taking the blade or taking the steel. Alternate spellings include the plural prises de fer or les prises de fer, and incorrectly prise de fer. There are 4 prise de fer actions: opposition, croise, bind, and envelopment. However, each fencing master and fencing doctrine has a separate view of prise de fer. William Gaugler lists all 4 actions under prise de fer in his Dictionary of Fencing Terminology, while Roger Crosnier in his book Fencing with the Foil only mentions the croise, the bind, and the envelopment as prise de fer actions. Any prise de fer action requires that the blades be engaged, and it works best against an opponent who uses and maintains a straight arm. Additionally, a successful action demands surprise, precise timing, and control. Opposition. In the opposition, a fencer takes an opponent's blade in any line and then extends in that line, diverting the opponent's blade until the action is complete. The opposition can be done from any line, and it is a strong attack when done with a straight thrust. The amount of power needed to complete an opposition is just enough to carry the opponent's blade barely out of line, but not so much as to force it into a different line. The opposition is typically classified as an action in the French style of fencing, and it is similar to what the Italian school calls a glide. However, some doctrines teach that the opposition and the glide are separate actions, but the glide can be done using an opposition. William Gaugler defines the opposition as an action completed during a thrust in which the hand is shifted against the opponent's blade in an attempt to close the line, while the glide slides along the opponent's blade onto target. Louis Rondel instructs that a glide should be kept in opposition, and that it is in reality a feint of direct thrust. Julio Martinez Castillo refers to the glide as a sliding thrust that will dominate the opponent's blade by forcing it to the side. Bind. The bind takes the opponent's blade from any line diagonally. The action can be done from high to low line or vice versa. For example, from 6th, the opponent's blade is taken to 7th, or from 8th, the blade is taken to 4th. The bind is also known as a transport or a transport and glide. As with all other prise de fer actions, there are numerous fencing doctrines. Luigi Barbasetti teaches that the bind is only done from prime CL. Beaumont teaches that the bind is done by making a half-circular movement with the blades continually in contact, carrying the opponent's blade diagonally from a high to a low line on the opposite side of the target or vice versa. The attack is then made by extending the arm and lunging while holding the opponent's blade. Julio Martinez Castillo recommends that the bind be followed by a glide, but any attack is possible. To complete the bind from low line, first the forearm and blade are raised with the blade slightly off line. Once the blade is sufficiently raised to high line, the arm and blade are carried across to the new line until in position. Also see Miscellaneous and Flanconade below. Croisé. The croisé carries the opponent's blade vertically from one line to the opposite line on the same side. For example, from 6th, the blade is carried to 8th. This action is sometimes referred to as a cross, and it is well described as a semi-bind. However, some fencing schools believe that the croisé is only done from high line to low line. Other fencing doctrines believe that the croisé from low line to high line is at least theoretical if not truth. There are also those that believe the croisé to be a bind, as Julio Martinez Castillo wrote in his book The Theory and Practice of Fencing. Also see Miscellaneous, Flanconade, and Copertino below. Envelopment. An envelopment is conducted by starting in a line and then completing a full circular motion in order to return to that same line. This action is also known as a circular transfer or an envelopment. One school of thought is that the action is, in theory, done from any line, but it works best when done from 6th because of the difficulty of holding onto the opponent's blade otherwise. Jean-Jacques Gillet writes that the envelopment can be done from all lines but works particularly well in the actions that move the blade to the outside of the body. Roger Crosnier writes that the size of the circle in the envelopment needs to be limited, and in order to do so, the actions must be made with the wrist, because otherwise the action would be too slow and cumbersome and thereby easily detected and deceived. Julio Martinez Castello teaches that the envelopment is essentially a combination of two binds since it completes two semicircles. In addition, he writes that the action can be followed by any attack, but preferably a glide, because that combination would continue to sustain a constant control of the opponent's blade. Miscellaneous. Alignment. Alignment is an action that takes the blade from high line to low line or vice versa. Depending on the motion of the action taken, the alignment can be interpreted as either a bind or a croise. A croise from 6 as well as a bind from 6 takes the blade from high to low line. Flanconade. The flanconade is referenced as being a bind or a croise. Imre Vass defines it as a bind thrust in which a fencer carries the opponent's blade from high line to low line on the same side, but it will be the diagonal line for the opponent. Depending on the motion of the action, this can be interpreted as either a bind or a croise. William Gaugler writes that there are three flanconades: the flanconade in fourth or external flanconade, the internal flanconade, and the flanconade in second. The flanconade in fourth is the same as a croise from fourth, whereas the internal flanconade is a transport bind to first from third ending with a glide to the inside low line, and the flanconade in second is a transport bind to second from full. Louis Rondel explains the flanconade as starting in a high 4 and then carries it downward until it terminates as a thrust under the opponent's arm. This description, against a right-handed opponent, can be interpreted as a croise. Copertino. The Copertino is another term associated with the croise as well as the flanconade. Imre Vass differentiates the Copertino and the croise by listing them both as a bind thrust actions on the same side, but the Copertino ends on the opposite side of the opponent's blade while the croise simply ends in the opposite. The Copertino is also interpreted as a croise.